Growing up in a religious family, I tend to believe in the supernatural. For me, it makes sense that where there's a God, there's Satan. Where there's heaven, there's hell. And where there are angels, there are demons. It also makes sense that spirits can become stuck between these planes of the living and the dead. Now, this will sound weird to you, especially if you're a skeptic. I try to think of every logical explanation possible before I assume an occurrence to be paranormal. Anyway, the only reason I believe in what I had seen at my window that day was due to the fact that my dog had acted in a way he had never before or ever since. I should mention that I had 3 dogs growing up that weren't that big and didn't appear intimidating. I had a little poodle named Misty and 2 Karen Terriers named Cole and Tanner. Tanner is the dog in question in this story. Tanner was the biggest of the 3. He was a stocky 21 pounds, but he still didn't look as scary as a German Shepherd or Pit Bull, but he had what I like to call the heart of a fighter. Being the only male, I can only assume that in his mind, that put him in the position to be overprotective of not just Misty and Chloe, but of my mum and me as well. I should also note that being a terrier meant that he would go nuts whenever he saw a squirrel outside. Anyway, this happened to me when I was home alone one day. My parents were off running errands, my older siblings were away at school, and I believe my twin had gone golfing. Misty and Chloe were both napping in my parents' room while Tanner was lying in my lap as I was sitting in the living room. It had become a rather boring day. I had finished my homework and there was nothing to do. I was flipping through the channels on the television to try to find something to watch. Every now and then my eyes would leave the screen as I looked down at Tanner or around the house with all the windows. My house has many windows and a very open floor layout. From where I sat, I could see our dining room where there were 2 windows on either side. All the blinds were closed, including the back French doors, but the shades for the 2 windows were raised. Normally they were down much lower and the blinds would be open slightly, but today they were raised pretty high. Not sure if my mum had cleaned them that day or not. After flipping through the channels for what felt like the 100th time, all of a sudden Tanner picked up his head and barked a few times. I scolded at him and told him to calm down. I sat up and looked out the right window, overlooking the side yard. This spot was known as the neighborhood park. I tried to see if he saw a person or a squirrel, but there was nothing. "Tanner, you weirdo, there's nothing out there," I said. I thought he had barked at a leaf since he had done that before. I went back to what I was doing. Only a few seconds had passed when I noticed that Tanner still hadn't relaxed or put his head back down. I ignored this and put the TV on mute to see if I could hear anyone walking around outside, but there was no sound. Then a slow, uneasy feeling crept over me. Goosebumps covered my arms and chills went up my spine. My neck felt like the little hairs were sticking up. At that moment, I felt that I was being watched. I have no clue where this feeling came from, but I had it nonetheless. Animals are sensitive to supernatural presence. That was the thought that entered my head, with a brief flash of scenes from an old TV show about animals and spirits that I had begun watching only a few weeks back. I grew nervous as the images persisted in my mind. I was still looking at the TV while this was going through my head, and I could feel on my legs that Tanner was very still. I looked down at him to see the hairs on the back of his neck were raised and ruffled. I also picked up on the fact that he was looking at something. I followed his gaze to the right window, and up near the top I saw something odd. It was some solid, clear orb thing, like a floating, bumpy crystal ball. In a millisecond, I debunked that it wasn't light from the sun, a weird reflection or what have you. I felt a serious unease now, and I looked back at my dog and yelled, "Tanner, go get it!" No sooner had those words left my lips that Tanner sprang from my lap and charged, barking wildly at the spot. I was frozen as I allowed him to bark for a while until I knew I had to get up. I sped walked over to him and picked him up before looking up at the window myself. Whatever it was gone. I studied the scene outside and there was nothing. I still felt uneasy and ran back into my parents' room, locked the door and gathered all the 3 of my dogs around me. I called my parents to help calm my nerves, asking them when they could be home. My mum reported they would be home in 5 minutes or so. I began to relax and just laid back there with my dogs, wondering what the heck I had just experienced. I knew what I had seen was real. I've always liked reading and learning things about the paranormal and the thought of the orb. Spiritual orbs are one of the many paranormal phenomena that can occur. These orbs can either be white, blue, clear yellow, red, or black. It was the black and the red ones that were known to be evil or negative entities, while the other colors were positive entities. Knowing that I had seen a clear one, I became curious as to why that spirit was at my window. Was it a deceased relative of mine checking in on me and felt bad for scaring me? Or was it a wandering spirit looking for a place to inhabit and knew by my dog's actions that it was not welcome? Whatever the case, it left and never returned. It's been years since that day, and all 3 of those dogs have passed away. I still believe in what I saw that day and even told my parents about it years later. They were skeptical at first until I told them about Tam's behavior. Even though he was protective, he had never attacked on command or attacked anyone at all. He was no killer. Whenever he would bark, I would emit the same amount of fear I had that day and would yell those same words, but he would just look at me as if to say, "What are you talking about?" I even set up the same scenario in the living room once, when the weather and the sun were like that day, and had him go after something as soon as he barked, but he just sat still in my lap and put his head back down. So if you have any pets at home, and you see them behave in a way that's not normal, and you feel uneasy, take them and your feelings seriously. You never know if it's a person or the supernatural.